kingdom men should be the heroes of the house.
Hey, thanks everybody for joining us again on the Underground Railroad with Sam and Abraham. Today we have Pastor Kirk back again, and Pat, thanks for coming here and showing up. And so we're going to go back over the effects of the fathers, whether when they're in your life or when they're not in your life, and how big of a priority they are. And we've already kind of discussed about how pivotal they are in our lives. And so, Pastor Kirk, I'd like to ask you, what are the effects of that role when it's either unfulfilled or when it's completely fulfilled? Like, what does that do to the family's life, the children's life?
Thanks, Sam and Abe. Good to talk with you guys. I've been thinking about that a lot yesterday and today, just anticipating our conversation and where it took me back to, and I hope this doesn't seem too far afield, but toward the end, Jesus was trying to tell his followers where this is all going, and they were having a hard time with it. And Philip said to him, "Lord, just show us the Father, and that would be enough." And Jesus said, "Have I been with you this long, and you still don't know who I am? Anyone who has seen me has seen the Father." And then I think Jesus said to them at another time, he said, "I only do what I see the Father doing." He said another place that the words I get, I receive from the Father and pass them along to you. And so I've been thinking, no matter how good any of our fathers may be, or we may or may not be, we don't want to start assessing anything with who we are, because that's a very for all of us, for any Christian, that's a real natural, I think, kind of a stumbling block, and because it's real easy for us to see our own lacks and where we come short. But so I think we want to start with who he is and who he has revealed the Father to be, and say, okay, Lord, you've called us to this, and we're confident you intend to help us, and we know we're not there yet, but by your grace we keep moving in that direction. And so there's always, a lack, because nobody has been the perfect fulfillment of who the Lord demonstrated. And so I just I could talk about my father's lacks. We had our issues, I got some really good things from him. What I got, the big things I know, and I've just been sharing even lately, I got from him a strong work ethic, honesty and integrity, and being generous. My parents were both very generous. But still, my dad and I had problems, and when they separated, I was thankful for it, because there was some contention coming our way, and he and I got resolved, before he died. But so anyway, I don't know if that, I don't want to throw it off course too much or anything, but I think if we don't want to focus on our life, so everybody has been shortchanged to a certain extent, and hopefully that when our eyes are open to who God really is, it awakens us to everything that we haven't received yet, or everything that shouldn't have been, gets made right with him, and we get to look to him saying, God, you've called yourself our Father, and Jesus told us, when you pray like this, and you start with two words, our Father in heaven. We're just 2 weeks into a series. We're starting on the Lord's Prayer, and my first week I didn't get beyond those two words, our Father. And so who he is really the biggest thing.
Yeah. So what do you think the greatest pitfalls for fathers are, and how do you think you can avoid them? And there's a question that I was wondering, was is there a difference for a pitfall for a father that's raising a boy versus raising a girl? Is it different for each one? Because I honestly don't have a clue.
Well, you have nothing but brothers. You don't have any sisters, right? And so
all the others are nothing but men.
Yeah. Your dad didn't deal with that. I have one of each, and I have admitted, and I call them chauvinist, whatever. My daughter, I didn't want hurtful things to happen to her, right? My son, I thought, well, he breaks a bone, gets a few stitches, whatever. I'm toughing him up, And so, but I admit I was different toward them, and she probably didn't like. She probably thought I was overprotective, but so we're gonna have our shortcomings. I think, Sam, I think the biggest thing I would encourage fathers to embrace is to be an encouragement to our children. The Bible says, the Apostle Paul wrote, fathers, don't exasperate your children. And so I think we really want to be an encouragement to them. I always, they know that I challenged them. My daughter was about 30 when she gave me this poem called, somebody else had written, but called Difficult Parents. Well, we both knew who she was talking about. And in my mind, I was challenging them, and I always tried to tell them, don't meet the standard, set it, do your best. But I think fathers really want to be unmistakably encouraging. Their children need to believe that we're for them,
Yeah. So, what is the most important lesson that you hope that you taught your children, right? What is the most important lesson?
Wow. Both of our kids came to us at age 12, and so we didn't birth either of them.
Okay.
And so, yeah, and so I mean, we have a little different role. Although we got to spend our first two grandkids, we spent 9 years raising them when they were little. But I think the most important thing, I guess, I think life is relational. I think God made it to be relational, and I think being loving, quite frankly. I don't care what your talents are or whatever. I mean, God loves us, and so I think we want to be loving. And this struck me pondering this conversation tonight. It's been said for a long time, and I agree with it, that most of what our children get from us is caught, not taught. And if they're faced with the difference between what we say and what we do, they're going to gravitate towards what we do.
Yeah.
And so I would think demonstrating that we're loving would probably be the best thing we could do for them.
Okay. So being like your kids was adopted, right? So I imagine
I'm my son's biological father, but his mother and I were never married. And he ran away when he was 12. He had never lived with me, and he ran away when he was 12 and came to my wife and I. Our daughter, we adopted at age 12.
Okay. So being that it came in like almost preteen, how was that? Was that raising them kind of difficult, kind of hard, easy? Was it more receptive? Was it combative? What was that like?
It was with our daughter. It was a huge change for her. She had been being raised by her grandparents, and they both died very close to each other, and she was really kind of cast adrift. And so here she is with these strangers. With our son, his stepdad, his mother had married, and his stepdad was extremely hard on him. I mean, extremely hard on him. And so for both of them, it took a while to figure things out. And my wife and I, did agree that we need to love these kids. I mean, there are times they did some wild stuff, and there had to be consequences. But and so, I don't. They might not. Our daughter probably spent 10 years trying to prove we didn't love her. So we need to love her anyway. But I think so we need to say, who is this child, and whether we got him right out of the womb or where we became this father role. I think we need to ask ourselves, who is this child? Because they're different,
Right.
And so how do we lovingly encourage them in the distinctiveness of who they are?
That's a good word.
I don't want to call it abusive, but
It was
typical.
abusive.
Okay. So he's coming from an abusive thing. So what does it look like in disciplining the kid that's coming from that abusive environment versus a kid coming from a non-abusive environment? Like, would you discipline differently, or would you would you take your hands off of it? Like, what does that look like to have godly discipline on a kid like that versus a kid that has had none of those experiences? And is it different, or is it just the same? Like, is it just like hammer them out, spare the rod, spoil the child, handle that? Or how do you handle stuff like that?
That's a great question, Sam. Maybe especially with ones we got later, but James Dobson, I heard years ago, he said, say yes as often as you can. Don't say no unless you really have to, so that when you say no, it means something. And, my son had experienced such total negative hostility toward him that no's were going to land a lot harder than intended. I was very fortunate in that we had some things to connect over, in that I was athletic. I played every sport coming up. My son was very athletic. So we were able to come together over football and baseball and have this common, bond. And I think that was very helpful. Yeah.
So what do you think the most difficult part of raising a child? Like, as a father, what's the toughest part?
For me, the toughest part is maybe when you need the discipline. There are some consequences that they're not going to like, and quite frankly, when we talked to them about discipline, when discipline happens, first of all, it's not going to happen quickly or lightly. For us, we decided that if there's going to be sort of applied discipline, there needs to be like 3 failures to get there. I mean, first of all, they need to have an opportunity to understand what the requirements really are, where the line between good and bad are. And then there needs to be, a warning, and then, probably a second warning with something pretty mild. And then, a warning with a promise that says, listen, you continue down this path, I mean, it's going to get hard. You're not going to like it. And by time, if they do push you that far, then to be able to say, okay, I know my child is liable to really resent me for this, but I also know it needs to happen, because real life can be really hard. And they need to, even if they, wind up speaking or saying, that they think really poorly of me because I required this of them, I need to do it for right reasons, and then hopefully help them understand. We had very different situations. Our daughter pretty quickly figured out, they were both really smart, but within about 6 months, she figured out how our household worked. And she became so cooperative. She became what looked like just the perfect kid, became a good student, became just well-mannered. She would serve, she'd do the help with everything else, and my son, not so much. He was probably too much like his dad, but I think just dealing with them independently and saying, okay, even if they don't like me for this, I need to trust that eventually they'll see that it was good.
Yeah. So, like, what is something that like you've gone over, looking back in time in life, raising your children? What is one thing that you wish you could take back, if there is one?
I think I was too demanding, probably. I mean, not in some hostile way, but I wound up requiring a lot of myself, and so without even intending to, required a lot of them. One of, I think, my real errors, and I've admitted it to them, is because I was wild, I suspected they were going to be.
Yeah.
And so there were times when I was looking at them with a critical eye that was inappropriate. They were just being kids,
Yeah.
But I was colored by my own, I was a wild kid, and so
Okay.
And one thing I'll tell you, so let me tell you, so one time, so here's my son. We get into high school, he's in high school, and he's a big kid. He's a big hulking brute. He's playing nose tackle on the high school football team. I think he's a junior. And he came into the house one evening, and I forget what the issue even was, but he's walking through, and I said something, and he kept right on walking, didn't even look at me, and flipped me off with some smart mouth remark. And I caught up with him in the kitchen, and I jammed him up against the wall, with my hand on his throat, and quite frankly, my fist was doubled up, and I threatened him so that he believed me. You shouldn't, you're not going to speak to me like that. And he went to his room, and I got back to the living room before I sat down and said to me, "You're wrong. You should never have done that." And I went to my son. I said, "Listen, son, I should not have done that. Please forgive me. You should never have to fear that your father's going to hurt you. And I will never do that again." And because he'd heard stories about me, living with his mother and his stepdad, and but so I think as a dad, we need to admit to our kids when we're wrong. We need to be willing to ask them to forgive us, when we've done it wrong, and demonstrate that part of it too.
Yeah, that's a good word. What else you got, Sam?
Yeah, I that kind of was leading me into one of the last questions that I was going to ask. I guess in a sense you answered it, but like if you have kids and you're sitting there and that they're bitter, like how do you? And let's say it's from something you did, or maybe this wasn't something you did. It was just, you know what I mean? It was something that happened to them, and maybe you couldn't stop it, or just whatever. Like, how would you recommend a parent talk to their kids? Maybe they got, pushed off into the foster care system. They end up abused, end up coming back, and and there's this bad blood, and like, how can a parent reach out to their kid and approach them? And like, how do you go about making restoration? Is it as simple as just like what you did with your own son, and just like, dude, I'm sorry, I was wrong? And how long should you wait for that? Like, I know people that have approached their children and like, hey man, just shoot me straight, what's going on? And they just they fail to be honest. Like,
Yeah.
How do you handle
Sam,
those situations?
Yeah, and I don't agree. There appears to be a parenting mentality out there today to let the child make the decisions. The Bible says, "Train up your children in the way they should go." Now that's young children, and training is not teaching.
Right.
If you've ever had coaches, if you were ever in the military, they're training you about how to do this. And there is a requirement. Here's how we do this, and we're going to keep doing it so you can do it confidently. But even that being said, and so there'll be different responses to what I'm going to say at different ages. But I really think it's probably true with all human conflict. But I think we want to invite the child into whatever the solution is. One time I learned that my daughter had been stealing some money from me. Since I didn't know, I started mowing lawns when I was like 11 or 12. I've always stashed money. I always had money in pockets or jars or something like that. And I suspected, so I laid a little trap, and I realized she'd been stealing from me, and so I called over. She was in high school, and I called over to school one day, and I said, "Yeah, I need to come by and pick up my daughter. Would you please have her, come on out front from class, And so I pulled up. She was there. She got in the car. We're headed for home, and I said, "Well, honey, here's what I've found." And it's not a question. I actually was keeping track to the extent I know how much for human nature. And we rode along in silence for, quite a way, probably maybe 10, 12 blocks or something. And then I asked her, "What do you think we ought to do about this? How, how do we make this right? How do we put this behind us in confidence? And I just invited her into the solution, and I think if we're going to really impart, what is love? Love is caring about who the other person is. And so I think even at young ages, because if we've been training them, I think we ask them, okay, what do we need to do about this? How do we get this thing pointed in the right direction here? And I mean, they might say some stupid stuff, if they're a kid like me, they might say some smart mouth stuff. I don't know, but at least make, the invitation, and they'll come to know it's genuine, and they'll come to know that we're not just discount. You know what? The worst thing one person can do to another person is to devalue that person. I tell this to people headed for marriage all the time. The worst thing you can do is to so that you communicate to them that what they think doesn't matter. That's the worst thing you can do. And so I think with a kid, we're not going to put them in charge. That's stupid. They're children. They haven't developed and matured, but still we invite them into the process and we let them be contributors. And that gives them an opportunity to then bring forth what's good and right. And we can agree with them on it, even if it means they're going to lose their privileges for a week. So,
That's a good word there, man. That's a great word.
Yeah. So what would you want your kids to know is the number one reason why you raised them as you raised them? Like what was your overarching, say, vision or goal for their life?
I hope, if I live long enough to die and my kids then show up at my funeral, then I hope that they would say, sometimes my dad was harder than I think he needed to be when we were kids, but I believe he wanted us. I believe he loved us, and I believe he wanted us to know he loved us.
Yeah, that's good.
And so there's another step, and like I said, we had 9 years with our first two grandkids, and my first grandson, I started him playing baseball, got him on little. It was actually a coach pitch. It wasn't T-ball. Got him on a little baseball team when he was 7, and played baseball, every year. I'm sure through the kids 5,000 baseballs, but so he'd become 12. He had a lot of natural athletic ability, and so. I take them to practice, and they're going to play the toughest game they've ever played. I mean, these are the kids who like high school players, But I see him out there warming up before the game, and he's just out there screwing around, flipping the ball around, not serious or anything. And I'm starting to get ticked. I'm sitting in the car because I try to teach them to do your best. Always do your best. Require your best of yourself. And I'm starting to get ticked enough to get out of the car and go say something. I'm sure the Lord said to me, "He's not like you." Okay, wow. But I was an aggressive kid, and he's not. He's a real easygoing, mild-mannered kid in spite of his talent, And the Lord was just saying, "Back off. Don't go out there and judge him because he's not like you."
Yeah, that's good.
So
All right,
what's
Sam.
the worst thing you can think in? Oh, go ahead, Abraham.
No, I said go ahead. Go ahead.
So what's one of the worst things that you can do to a kid? Like if you say, "Hey, this is one thing, stay away from doing this." Like a common thing that maybe fathers or mothers do or parents do to their kids is like it has a lot of damage. Like what would you say? Hey, dude, don't do this. This jacks them up. Because I know you've probably counseled a lot of people. You've been a pastor for a long time, and you've lived a fairly long life. And what is kind of an easy thing that people can pick up on? Like, man, do not do this.
Yeah, I think the easiest, really bad thing we can do is when the child, no matter their age, has done something wrong, to say it about them rather than about what they did. So I'll tell you, my dad, pretty much everybody agrees he got saved. He died pretty young, he was 58. So he's in heaven, everything's cool. But so I was about 11 or 12 years old, and I was doing this household chore, and my father came in and became enraged that I was doing it wrong, and kicked me in the butt, down on my face, and stuff, and yelled at me, told me I was a moron and an idiot and all that. And I realized very much later in life, I mean, way later in life, after 20, 25 years of pastoral service, that from that point on, I had made this. I wasn't trying to prove myself to my dad. I wasn't trying to get back at him. I was always trying to prove myself to me that I was not an idiot or a moron. And so I think the worst thing, we could do to a kid is to somehow brand them as being bad because they did a bad thing. Make sure it's always about whatever the wrong action was. Don't let it ever be about the kid. Don't ever call them dumb or stupid or an idiot. Don't belittle the child. Don't belittle who they are. Point out, keep it about what they did, not who they are. They need to know that we just value them so highly. You might have, son, you might have just done the stupidest thing you ever could have. You're a smart kid. Why would you do that? You know what I mean? But it's about what he did, not who he is.
Yeah, that's one of my things.
In relating,
everything comes jumping in. That's one of my things right there, Sam, is that when it comes to raising our children, like, we should never belittle them. We should never talk down on them. We should always be encouraging, uplifting, even when they mess up, man. So, like, that's like really one thing that I really kind of hang my hat.
I was a standout athlete, and I remember I had, won some award, and my mom had said to me, "Oh, your dad's really proud of you," and I said, "Never heard him say it," and so that they should know that, I think very highly of you. They should know that.
Yeah, no doubt. Now, what you gonna say, Sam?
Yeah, so you were talking about branding a child because they'd done something really dumb, and then you were also talking when we first started. You've been doing a series on Our Father, and you didn't get past the Our Father and the Lord's Prayer. So, what would you say? Could you kind of lead us in like how our Father has branded us as His children? And
children,
kind of the name He's given us.
You mean our Heavenly Father?
Yeah.
That's what a great question, because here's Jesus, and this is smack in the middle of the first Sermon on the Mount, his first ever public teaching, Matthew chapters 5, 6, and 7, right smack in the middle of it. In chapter 6, he says, when you pray like this. I think he's saying, start with who God is and who you are in relationship with him. And who we are in relationship with him is supposed to be who he made us to be, who he called us to be. And we need to never forget that he created us for loving relationship. That's why we exist. And, we can wind up with a lot of messages other than that on the human plane. There are men who are father figures in our lives that aren't our biological father. But God the Father, our Father, and here's one of the biggest things. I think people really hadn't thought about it much. When Jesus said, when you pray a prayer like this, our Father in heaven, he was including himself. He was part of the our. Right. And so if we're going to pray that, we're saying that I'm willing to join with Jesus and in looking to God as our Father. And I think the other thing that's going to do is God is saying to us, if you're going to embrace me as your Father, then the our part, the first one, means you have to include the other people that are mine too. Christians too are too good at writing each other off. They're, and so I think maybe then when it comes to our kids, I think we teach our kids then to not look down on other kids, to not criticize other kids. We're living in a world that is making an art form out of finding fault with each other. And God doesn't do that.
So we just thank you for being here with us today, Pastor Kirk, and anybody listening. We hope that this, brought some type of clarity and closure, and maybe some inspiration on the way you can kind of change the way you raise your kids. And you can always pivot; it's never too late. But me and Abraham, we thank you guys for joining us, and we look forward to hearing you guys listen again. All right, be good.